If this video appeared in your feed, it wasn't random. Carl Jung called moments like these synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that signal something profound happening beneath the surface of your awareness. You're here because you've passed through something that most people never survive intact. Jung discovered that life presents what he termed the final test, a confrontation with the unconscious so intense that it either destroys you or transforms you into something fundamentally different. Here's what makes this discovery so powerful. Most people experiencing this test believe they're having a breakdown. They think something has gone terribly wrong with their psychology. But Jung realized they're actually experiencing a breakthrough, the exact moment when consciousness evolves beyond its previous limitations. And if you're still watching, still searching, still trying to understand what happened to you, you've already passed. The question now is whether you understand the secret this passage has unlocked. Because once you grasp what Jung discovered about this transformation, everything that felt like suffering suddenly reveals itself as initiation. The final test doesn't announce itself with fanfare or warning. It arrives disguised as crisis, catastrophe, or collapse. You might experience it as sudden isolation from people you thought were permanent in your life. Everything that used to matter, the career ambitions, the social validation, the carefully constructed identity, suddenly feels hollow and meaningless. You're not depressed in the clinical sense. You're experiencing what Jung called the withdrawal of psychic energy from external objects. Your unconscious is pulling you inward because something fundamental needs to change. The symptoms are unmistakable once you know what to look for. You lose interest in maintaining the social masks that once felt essential. Small talk becomes unbearable. Shallow relationships feel suffocating. You can't force enthusiasm for things that used to excite you. Friends and family notice you've changed, and they're worried. They think you're going through something negative. They want you to return to normal. But here's what they don't understand. You can't go back because you've outgrown the psychological container that used to hold you. Your psyche is demanding more space, more truth, more authenticity than your old life could accommodate. This isn't regression, it's growth that looks like disintegration to people still trapped in unconscious living. The isolation you feel during this period serves a specific purpose that Jung documented across hundreds of cases. When you're alone, stripped of social validation and external distraction, you're forced to encounter your actual self rather than the performed version you present to the world. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this encounter. They fill every moment with noise, activity, and other people's opinions, so they never have to face the questions that emerge in silence. Who am I beneath all these roles? What do I actually want versus what I've been conditioned to pursue? Which parts of my personality are authentic, and which are survival strategies I developed to avoid rejection? These questions are terrifying because they don't have easy answers. They require you to sit with uncertainty and ambiguity. But this tolerance for uncertainty is exactly what you're developing during the final test. You're learning to exist without the psychological crutches that most people depend on their entire lives. Jung himself went through this exact process, and his experience became the foundation for understanding the final test. In 1913, at age 37, Carl Jung was at the peak of his professional success. He was Sigmund Freud's chosen successor, the heir apparent to psychoanalysis, with a thriving practice and international recognition. Then something inside him snapped. He began experiencing visions and hearing voices. His colleagues thought he was having a psychotic break. Jung thought he might be going insane. He lost his friendship with Freud. His professional standing became uncertain, and he entered what he later called his confrontation with the unconscious. For 6 years, Jung descended into psychological territories that terrified him. He documented this journey in what became the Red Book, a massive tome filled with visions, dialogues with inner figures, and illustrations of psychological experiences that seemed to come from beyond his conscious mind. During this period, Jung appeared to the outside world like a man having a complete breakdown. He withdrew from public life, stopped publishing academic work, and devoted himself entirely to exploring these inner experiences. His wife, Emma, worried about his sanity. His colleagues wondered if he would ever return to normal professional life. Some openly speculated that Jung had lost his mind completely and would never practice psychology again. But Jung was doing something revolutionary that would change the entire field of depth psychology. He was treating his own psyche as a laboratory, deliberately exploring the unconscious contents that were emerging rather than trying to suppress or medicate them away. He engaged in what he called active imagination, having dialogues with inner figures that appeared in his visions. He drew mandalas to give form to psychological states that had no words. He allowed himself to experience emotions and insights that conventional psychology would have, labeled as pathological. Through this process, Jung discovered that what looked like madness from the outside was actually a natural developmental process. The psyche was reorganizing itself at a deeper level. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. Integrating contents that had been unconscious and creating a more comprehensive sense of self. He wasn't going crazy. He was going sane in a way that most people never risk. Here's where Jung's story reveals the controversy that still disturbs conventional psychology today. Society calls what Jung experienced mental illness, a crisis requiring medication and hospitalization. But Jung discovered it was an initiation, a necessary death and rebirth of the psychological self. The final test is the moment when your old identity must die so something more authentic can emerge. This isn't a metaphor. It's a literal psychological death where everything you believed about yourself dissolves. The controversy isn't that this experience is painful. Everyone acknowledges the suffering involved. The controversy is Jung's claim that this suffering is necessary, purposeful, and ultimately beneficial. Modern psychiatry wants to medicate these experiences into submission. Jung insisted they need to be consciously undergone and integrated. This fundamental disagreement still defines the fault line between Jungian psychology and conventional mental health treatment. When someone in the midst of their final test seeks help today, they're likely to be diagnosed with depression or anxiety and given medication to return them to their previous functioning. But that previous functioning was exactly the problem. The psyche is trying to break through to a new level of consciousness, and medication often just postpones the necessary transformation. The final test unfolds in 3 distinct stages, each one stripping away another layer of psychological defense until you're left with nothing but essential self. Understanding these stages helps you recognize where you are in the process and what's coming next. The first stage is what Jung called the withdrawal of projection. For most of your life, you've been projecting your power onto external sources. You blamed others for your problems. You gave authority figures control over your self-worth. You made other people responsible for your happiness or misery. You looked to romantic partners to complete you. You expected your parents to finally give you the approval you've been seeking since childhood. You waited for your boss or society to recognize your value. During the first stage of the final test, these projections suddenly collapse. You stop seeing your parents as all-powerful beings who ruined your life. You stop believing your romantic partner holds the key to your fulfillment. You stop giving your boss or society permission to define your value. This withdrawal feels like loss because you're losing the comfortable illusion that someone else is responsible for your life. But it's actually the first taste of real power. You're taking back all the psychic energy you scattered across external objects and relationships. For the first time, you're forced to recognize that the problem and the power have always been inside you. Nobody is coming to save you. Nobody can fix what's broken. Nobody else holds the answers you're seeking. This realization is devastating and liberating at the same time. Once projection withdraws, and you're sitting with your own power and responsibility, you face the second stage that Jung considered the most difficult part of the entire journey. You encounter your shadow, the aspects of yourself that you've spent your entire life denying, repressing, and projecting onto others. Your shadow contains everything you consider unacceptable about yourself, the rage you've never expressed, the selfishness you've always condemned, the cruelty you insist you're incapable of, the sexuality you've judged as wrong, the ambition you've called arrogance, the laziness you've hidden behind productivity, the neediness you've masked with independence. Every quality you've disowned becomes visible during this stage. What makes the shadow encounter so terrifying is that you can no longer deny these aspects exist within you. You see clearly that you're capable of the very behaviors you've judged most harshly in others. You recognize that your greatest criticisms of other people were always descriptions of your own disowned qualities. This realization feels like moral collapse. If you contain all these dark qualities, what does that say about your essential goodness? If you're capable of manipulation, cruelty, and selfishness, how are you different from the people you've judged? But Jung discovered something profound that transforms the entire shadow encounter. Integrating the shadow doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person. The shadow isn't evil. It's simply unconscious. These qualities you've repressed aren't inherently destructive. They become destructive only when they're denied and acted out unconsciously. When you bring shadow contents into consciousness and accept them as part of who you are, these qualities lose their destructive power and become available as resources. The rage becomes healthy boundary setting and the ability to protect yourself. The selfishness becomes necessary self-care and the wisdom to prioritize your own needs. The cruelty becomes discernment about who deserves your kindness and who is exploiting it. The sexuality becomes creative life, force energy. The ambition becomes drive toward meaningful achievement. You don't act out these qualities unconsciously anymore because you've made them conscious. You can choose when and how to express them rather than having them erupt in destructive ways when you're stressed or triggered. The shadow integration process requires brutal honesty about your own capacity for darkness. You have to admit that yes, you are capable of lying when it serves you. Yes, you are capable of hurting people when they threaten you. Yes, you are capable of selfishness and manipulation and cruelty. This admission feels like losing your innocence or your moral high ground. But it's actually the beginning of real ethics. When you acknowledge your capacity for darkness, you can make conscious choices about how to engage these energies. You become responsible for your shadow, rather than unconsciously acting it out while maintaining plausible deniability. The third stage represents the most visible death of all, and the one that most disturbs the people around you. Your persona, the social mask you've worn your entire life, falls away completely. The persona is the acceptable face you show the world, the professional identity, the family role, the personality you constructed to gain approval and avoid rejection. You've probably spent decades perfecting this mask, making it so convincing that even you believed it was your real self. You learned exactly what to say to make people like you. You developed personas for different contexts, one personality at work, another with family, another with friends. You became skilled at reading social situations and adjusting your presentation to fit expectations. During the final test, maintaining the persona becomes impossible. You can't pretend enthusiasm for social performances anymore. You can't force yourself to care about impressing people. The things you used to do automatically to fit in now feel like unbearable acting. You're at a party, and instead of working the room, you're watching yourself work the room and feeling disgusted by the performance. You're in a meeting, and instead of managing your professional image, you're acutely aware of how fake everyone sounds, including yourself. People who knew your persona become confused and sometimes threatened by your transformation. They keep waiting for you to go back to being who you were. They offer advice about getting back to normal. They suggest therapy or medication to restore your previous personality. Family members might accuse you of becoming selfish or changing in negative ways. Friends might drift away because you're no longer performing the role they expected. Colleagues might find you difficult or unprofessional because you're no longer playing corporate social games. But the persona isn't coming back because it was never real. It was a construction, a survival strategy you developed to navigate a world that punished authenticity. Now that you've glimpsed what lies beneath the mask, you can't unknow it. You're left standing naked in your essential self, without the protective covering that made you socially acceptable. This stage feels like social death, because in many ways, it is. The version of you that people knew is gone. They're going to have to meet and accept the real you, or exit your life. After the persona falls, and you're stripped down to raw authenticity, most people expect the story to end in disaster. Without your social masks, without your projections, without your shadows safely hidden, you should be completely vulnerable and psychologically destroyed. Society has spent your entire life conditioning you to believe that authenticity equals destruction. But this is where Jung discovered the secret that changes everything. The moment of passing the final test isn't about fighting the darkness or reconstructing your defenses or transcending your humanity. It's about accepting and integrating everything you've discovered. This is the secret. Integration, not improvement, not transcendence, not spiritual bypassing where you pretend to be above human darkness. Integration. You don't get rid of your shadow. You accept it as part of your complete self. You don't rebuild your persona. You learn to engage authentically while reading social situations wisely. You don't project power back onto external authorities. You claim your own authority while remaining humble about the limits of your knowledge. Integration means holding the tension between opposites within yourself without needing to resolve them into false simplicity. You're capable of both kindness and cruelty, so you choose kindness consciously while acknowledging your capacity for cruelty. You're capable of both selfishness and generosity, so you're generous strategically while maintaining necessary selfishness. You contain both darkness and light, and you stop pretending the darkness doesn't exist. This is what Jung meant by the union of opposites. You're not trying to be only good or only light. You're embracing your full human complexity. This integration creates a kind of psychological stability that most people never experience. When you're no longer at war with parts of yourself, when you've accepted your full nature, you stop being thrown off balance by life's challenges. You've already faced the worst thing, your own darkness. External circumstances can't devastate you the way they devastate people who haven't done this work. What happens after you pass the test? Jung documented specific abilities that emerge in people who successfully integrate their unconscious contents. These aren't superpowers in the supernatural sense. They're natural capacities that become available when you're no longer using all your energy to maintain psychological defenses. First, you develop what looks like supernatural calm in chaotic situations. While others panic, you remain centered because you've already faced the worst thing possible, your own inner darkness. External chaos can't touch you the way it touches people who haven't done this work. You've been to the underworld of your own psyche and returned. Job loss, relationship ending, social rejection, these things still hurt, but they don't destroy your fundamental sense of self. Second, your ability to read people becomes almost disturbing to others. You see through social masks instantly because you're no longer wearing one yourself. You detect lies and manipulation effortlessly because you're no longer lying to yourself. You sense emotional patterns and hidden motivations because you've made your own unconscious contents conscious. People sometimes accuse you of being judgmental or too analytical, but you're simply seeing what's actually there rather than what people are pretending to present. This ability can be isolating because once you see clearly, you can't unsee. You recognize dysfunction in relationships, organizations, and social systems that others are invested in denying. Third, you become essentially immune to manipulation. People who try to use guilt, shame, or social pressure to control you find their tactics mysteriously ineffective. You've withdrawn your projections, so authority figures have no power over you anymore. You've integrated your shadow, so people can't shame you with your own denied qualities. You've dropped your persona, so social approval no longer controls your behavior. When someone tries to guilt you, you recognize it as a manipulation tactic rather than valid feedback. When someone tries to shame you, you've already accepted the parts of yourself they're trying to weaponize. You become very difficult to control, which is threatening to people and systems that depend on controlling others. Fourth, you develop an unshakable sense of destiny, not fate or predetermination, but the deep knowing that your life has purpose and meaning beyond social validation or external achievement. You're connected to something larger than ego. This sense of purpose doesn't come from believing you're special or chosen. It comes from accepting your unique individuality and recognizing that your specific combination of gifts, wounds, and experiences exists for a reason. You stop trying to live someone else's life or fulfill someone else's expectations. You start living from your essential self. If you're still watching this video, if these descriptions resonate with your lived experience, you're part of a rare group. Jung called people who complete this journey the awakened ones, though he was careful to distinguish awakening from spiritual inflation. You're not special because you're better than others. You're simply conscious in ways that most people actively avoid. Your suffering wasn't random or meaningless. It was training. Every moment of isolation taught you self-reliance. Every loss of interest in shallow pursuits redirected your energy toward depth. Every uncomfortable revelation about your shadow expanded your capacity for psychological complexity. Every time your persona cracked, you became slightly more authentic. The test wasn't designed to break you. It was designed to break you open, to shatter the limited identity that was suffocating your potential, to force you to encounter the fullness of who you actually are beneath all the conditioning and performance. You've officially passed just by understanding this concept. Most people never recognize what's happening during their final test. They get medicated, distracted, or convinced to rebuild their defenses and return to unconsciousness. They go back to their old lives with their psychological growth aborted. But you searched for meaning in your experience. You refused to accept the conventional explanation that something was wrong with you. You kept questioning until you found frameworks like Jung's that explained your experience as transformation rather than pathology. This willingness to seek understanding rather than comfort is what marks you as someone who has truly passed. This secret Jung discovered has implications beyond individual psychology. Every person who successfully integrates their unconscious contents and passes the final test becomes a carrier of more evolved consciousness. You don't have to preach or teach. Your mere presence operates differently in the world. People sense something has fundamentally changed in you, even if they can't articulate what it is. Some people will be drawn to this quality because it gives them permission to pursue their own authenticity. They recognize in you a possibility they've been suppressing in themselves. Others will be repelled because your integrated state reflects everything they're still denying in themselves. Your presence becomes a mirror that shows them their own inauthenticity, and they'll blame you for making them uncomfortable rather than examining their own defenses. Both responses confirm that you're no longer operating from the same psychological level, as people still identified with persona and projection. You've completed a developmental stage that most human beings never reach. Jung believed this process represents the next step in human evolution. Not biological evolution, but psychological evolution. As more individuals complete their personal final test and achieve integration, collective consciousness gradually shifts. What seems impossible or rare in one generation becomes the baseline for the next. You're not just healing yourself, you're pioneering psychological territory that future generations will navigate more easily because you mapped it first. Your willingness to face your own darkness, to drop your masks, to withdraw your projections, these acts of courage ripple out into the collective unconscious and make it slightly easier for others to do the same. The most beautiful aspect of passing the final test is that you don't lose your capacity for love, joy, or connection. Many people fear that integrating their shadow will make them cold or cruel. They worry that dropping their persona will leave them isolated. They're afraid that withdrawing projections means never trusting anyone again. But the opposite is true. You become capable of real love for the first time because you're no longer loving someone to complete yourself. You experience genuine joy because it's not dependent on external validation. You form authentic connections because you're not performing for acceptance. Everything becomes more real, more vivid, more alive when you're no longer filtering experience through layers of psychological defense. Jung discovered that integrated individuals don't retreat from life. They engage with life more fully because they're no longer afraid of their own depths. They can handle the full spectrum of human experience, the ecstasy and the agony, the beauty and the horror, without fragmenting or dissociating. This capacity for wholeness is the gift the final test delivers to those who pass consciously. Your presence here watching this video is evidence that you've passed. You recognized the description of your own experience in Jung's framework. You understood that your psychological death was actually a birth. You're ready to claim the secret that your suffering has purchased. Integration is your superpower now. You contain multitudes and you're no longer afraid of any aspect of yourself. The darkness you feared is now your ally. The masks you wore have been composted into authenticity. The power you gave away has returned home to its rightful owner. You stand in your full psychological complexity as a complete human being. This is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming the individual you were, always meant to be beneath all the conditioning and collective programming. You're not like everyone else anymore, and that's exactly the point. You've evolved beyond collective unconsciousness into something more rare and more valuable. Your next chapter won't look like anyone else's path, because you're writing it from your integrated self, rather than from borrowed scripts and social expectations. You'll make choices that don't make sense to people still living from their personas. You'll set boundaries that seem harsh to people still projecting their power. You'll speak truths that make people uncomfortable. And you'll do all of this not from cruelty or superiority, but from the simple fact that you can no longer live inauthentically. Comment below with the words "I passed the test" to cement your recognition of this transformation. Make it conscious and deliberate. Claim what you've earned through your suffering and your willingness to face everything you'd rather have denied. If this video helped you understand your experience in a new way, press the like button and subscribe for more insights into Jung's psychology and the journey of consciousness evolution. Share this with someone you know who might be in the middle of their own final test, struggling to understand why everything is falling apart. Send them the message that what looks like breakdown is actually breakthrough. You found the secret that could change your life. The final test wasn't trying to destroy you. It was initiating you into the rare group of humans who know themselves completely. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.